The terrifying shadow of the origami killer hangs over Philadelphia. Who is he? What does he want? Why does he pick on children? When will he stop? Media pressure has forced the FBI to intervene to solve this case as quickly as possible.
The body of Jeremy Bowles was found this morning on a patch of wasteland in the East End at about 6:30 a.m. The state in which the body was found suggests the methodology of the origami killer.
Young boys disappear in broad daylight while playing near their school, on a zone that is too large to be able to make any precise cross-checks and stand a chance of localizing this somber descendant of Fritz Lang's M. 5 days later, the victims are found drowned in rainwater and without any visible trace of violence. Their faces are covered with mud, an orchid on their chest, and an origami figure of a dog in one hand. 3,500 statements, more than 100 suspects interrogated, from the loopy Nathaniel to Corda, the ex-con, and the perverse son of a millionaire, Gordy Kramer. And even the dejected father, Ethan Mars, incapable of explaining his repeated blackouts.
The killer is white, aged between 30 and 45. He is intelligent, calm, and determined. An organized type. He has a car. He's probably employed, but his work allows him free time.
Little by little, Agent Norman Jayden manages to put together the pieces of the puzzle. A man who uses his victims as symbols, always abandoning them near a railway line. The origami figure he leaves on the bodies of his victims is one of the most common kinds. However, one detail attracts Jayden's attention.
The killer kills only in the fall when there is plenty of rain. It could be that he puts them in some sort of well or tank that is open to the skies and that fills up with rainwater. The more it rains, the less time the victim has to live.
What Jayden does not know is that the origami killer has a special plan. He wants to find the ideal father. Each time he kidnaps a child, he sends a strange envelope to the father of the boy.
When the parents came home from church, all their children were gone.
This envelope contains an extract from the Pied Piper of Hamelin and a ticket to a luggage locker at Lexington Station. The locker contains a shoebox containing a pistol, a telephone, a memory card, and 5 origami figures in order. The memory card fits into the telephone. The telephone lights up. The kidnapped child appears, begging his father to come and save him.
Help! Dad!
Sean.
Where are you?
The father must go through a series of trials represented by the origami figures if he wants to get the message that will lead him to his son. 5 origami figures, 5 trials, driving up a highway against oncoming traffic, getting through a field of electrical condensers, cutting off a finger, killing a man, taking poison. That is the price he has to pay in order to prove his courage and recover his son. What is the origami killer's secret? He seems to be all-powerful, to have unlimited means. How did he get this apartment on Marble Street? The owner is none other than Adrian Baker, the infamous Doc. He lets the apartment to Paco from the Blue Lagoon, who is a buddy of the origami killer who released him from prison. He also acts as an intermediary with Mad Jack, who was supposed to repaint the origami killer's '83 Chevy Malibu. When these two leads are combined, they reveal the presumed name of the origami killer, John Shepard. He subscribes to an origami magazine. He's thought to have a Royal 5, a typewriter with special lettering, which enables Scott Shelby and Lauren Winter to trace his tracks back to Manfred the antique dealer, where he had the machine repaired. In reality, the young John Shepard died when he was only 10 years old while playing on a construction site belonging to Charles Kramer. He was swept away by a torrent of mud, and there was nothing his brother could do to save him. As they stand at the child's grave, Lauren Winter and Scott Shelby recognize that the origami killer is passing himself off as John Shepard. But why? Who is perpetuating the memory of John Shepard in the form of the origami killer? His brother, no doubt. Their mother, Anne, passed on her love of origami and orchids to her sons. She confesses to Madison that John's father did nothing to help him when he was drowning. She reveals the identity of John's brother in a whisper. Scott. When Madison has obtained this information, she decides to find Scott's address. Jaden deduces the address from several different elements. In the course of his fight with the origami killer in Paco's office, Jaden manages to rip off the pocket of the killer's coat. 2 service station tickets enable him to narrow down the geoprofiling zone. Now he has to find out who he is. Ari records the fight scene, and Jaden notices a disturbing detail. The killer is wearing a gold watch, the same watch that is offered to all police officers. However, there is only one ex-cop living in the overlap zone between the service station and the killer's zone of action: Scott Shelby. However improbable it may seem to the public at large, the origami killer is human, therefore capable of making mistakes. He presents himself as being commissioned by the families of the victims of the origami killer. But neither Susan, nor Hassan, nor Lauren have ever seen him.
The families of the victims of the origami killer asked me to investigate the murders. I also lost someone I loved. I know what you're feeling.
Moreover, his admission on several occasions that he too has lost a loved one may prove to be dangerous for his cover, just like the fact that he never refers to the elements he has gathered in his investigation with Lauren. And he almost betrays himself on 2 occasions, by disappearing mysteriously when he kills Manfred, and the fact that he is reticent to work with Lauren in the Eureka scene, although she has found a correspondence between the different tracks that might lead to the origami killer.
Oh, you know, checking out the alibi of 30 clients one by one, that's a lot of legwork.
Except that if we cross-check them with the list of subscribers to origami magazines, you still got that, right?
Yeah, of course. Lauren, wait.
Shelby is looking for a father who is worthy of the name, but all have failed him. From Hassan to Bowles and Lauren Winter's husband, all have failed.
Tell me about Johnny's father.
He left the day Johnny disappeared. I ain't seen him since. Coward.
When she calls him a coward, she doesn't know that he has no doubt begun the origami killer's trials, but failed. The same applies to Jeremy Bowles' father.
He disappeared the day after Jeremy.
Could it be his body that Ethan finds in the labyrinth of the butterfly trial? And what about Hassan, who didn't want to embark on these trials? The box remained intact in his shop. Shelby is getting desperate when he remembers seeing Ethan trying to save his son from the car outside the mall. He decides to apply this cruel test to him in the hope that he will live up to his expectations. A cop, an ex-cop in uniform so that children trust him and follow him. A sadist who plays with the nerves of his victims' fathers, observing his cruel games from his lair. A brutal killer who does not hesitate to eliminate his involuntary accomplices as he continues. A son disappointed by his father, traumatized by the death of his brother. A man moved by the love that a father can have for his son. The origami killer is all these at the same time. His terrifying shadow looms over Philadelphia, implacable, terrifying, inexorably accomplishing his crimes until he achieves his goal, until he is arrested, or until he disappears forever into the bustling crowds. Unusual game concept called for a new type of interface, both in terms of navigation and interactivity.
Regarding navigation, we wanted the character to move naturally inside realistic sets with a real cinematic feel. We couldn't achieve that with a camera stuck behind the character's back all the time, so we chose to have a broad variety of camera angles. We also needed to have realistically sized sets. Lots of games use artificially enlarged sets to help navigation, but this wouldn't have been consistent with Heavy Rain's realistic approach. This is also the reason why the playable character doesn't run inside his house, for instance.
We don't have repetitive mechanics like in most games where you got buttons and each button does something. Here, everything is contextual. So, all this has many consequences on the interface, on how you think about interactivity, how you think about gameplay in general.
The player's movements with the right stick had to imitate the actions of the character on screen, so that he made the same movements at the same time, being in direct control of the player's arm and the speed of his movements.
All our work regarding the interface of Heavy Rain was about creating immersion and using the interface to create immersion. So using the 6-axis was quite a simple decision to make, because we felt that when your character was hitting something, it was much more natural to do it by hitting it physically with your controller rather than by emulating this move with a button or whatever.
It's a fantastic possibility that's given now with nowadays controllers to be able to move them and to, trigger actions, or to be able to have a real physical sense of interaction.
Frenetically pressing a button imitates the idea of making an effort.
You look like you got a problem, man.
However, actions that required the player to press several buttons simultaneously were designed to place the player in an uncomfortable position, to reflect that of the character on the screen. The question of the interface display then came very quickly to the fore. Displaying icons in 2D on the screen amounted to making a sort of transparent window between the scene and the user. This would force him to constantly switch his focus from the foreground display to the scene in the background, which seemed to be quite unpleasant. The idea of integrating 3D icons in the set was first applied to the action sequences. The results were very quickly convincing, which made it logical to implement the same interface in the exploration sequences. The very first version of Heavy Rain's game design was based on a system of movement detection, an idea we abandoned before Sony decided to develop the Move. This is why the idea seemed perfectly natural and logical when we were asked to consider a version of Heavy Rain for Move.
The main challenge was to create an accessible experience while providing real depth of gameplay. We enriched the possibilities of interaction by tracking the move's position and orientation. Actions controlling the character's arm are performed holding the move controller horizontally. For instance, I'll go up to raise my character's arm, or I'll twist my wrist to turn a key in a keyhole. Actions engaging the whole character's body, like lying on a bed or getting up, require holding the controller vertically. We also implemented new types of movement, like moving forward to push a door or backward to pull a door. In short, everything was done to provide even greater richness of interaction compared to 6-axis.
Heavy Rain is a very dark thriller. It's an experience that I think for the first time is going to put gamers into very different emotional states. We're offering subject matters that are usually found in films or books, but I can't think of any game I've played in the past that would only scratch the surface of the different emotional aspects of this game that we're dealing with. It's a very deep story. It really touches, I think, on the emotional fiber of all mature audiences. And I think that makes it a rather unique experience.
We call it interactive drama. The game is really story-driven, but the player can change it. So it's a game because every choices are made by the player.
For Christ's sakes, shoot!
It's really the first time that we're such a level of performance for characters. I think that it's going to demonstrate, I hope, that emotion is the key to any entertainment form. And that by obtaining such a strong acting performance, you can raise the whole quality of the experience and therefore the quality of your game.
For God's sake, how hard is it to keep your eye on a child in the park? Why did you leave him, Ethan? Why? Wasn't it enough losing Jason? I'm sorry. It's not what I meant to say. I miss him so much.
We spent about a year doing casting sessions in the UK, in London and in Paris to try to find really the best actors for the main roles. And that was really important because we were not just looking for someone to give us his face or his voice, but we were basically looking for the full actor because then their face is scanned with a 3D scanner, so it's really their face in the game. We recreate the body exactly at the same size and the same height and everything. And then they come on set to shoot the motion capture animations. So we do all the walks, all the interactions, all the dialogues, pretty much everything is shot.
Here what we wanted is to use the system in a way that would give us the possibility to have actors truly play like if they were on a movie set. So they spent a lot of time with David Cage, the director, and Steve Knebely, the assistant director, to make sure that when they come on stage, they know what they have to do.
You're not gonna kill the Antichrist with a revolver, Nathaniel. He's much too powerful for that.
Antichrist, my ass! Get the gun out of my face!
Lieutenant Blake is gonna leave the planet right now and return to the realm of shadows. Creature of darkness, I do beseech you to return to the realm of shadows.
They have a full script. And we spent days and days and months just rehearsing with them to make sure they fully understand the story, their character, and they can deliver the performance we accept from them. You know, very often in games you need good performances for cutscenes, sometimes for dialogues. But here it's different because we really needed this level of quality in the performances pretty much in all the game.
You have to absolutely know it, and not just know it, you have to know it backwards and forwards, because the way that it's done, when you get to one of these choices and you have those moments, you have to know all of them very well, because you have to get to that point and then go to one, get to that point, then go to another, get to that point and then go to another, or maybe just do all three in a row, and they're all very different, but the point of departure is the same. And so preparing for that was really quite intense, because again I was working in an imaginary world.
To prepare myself for this particular role, I went to, there's an institute called it's called IGAP, and it's an institute of analytical psychologists, and I went to a few seminars, and specifically to do with forensics and forensic psychology.
If you don't relate to the characters, if you don't feel empathy for them, if you don't believe in what they say and how they feel, then the whole experience will just fall apart. I mean, it doesn't mean anything.
As lead artist, the first and foremost part of my job is to create a character from an actor. And not only make a faithful copy of the actor, but also give him as much personality as possible through 3D design. It means that we use the existing actor as a basis, and then we try to make the character fit his part in the game.
Quality, fucking wonderful, man. Shit, I'm glad I'm not me. I wouldn't want to meet me, man.
Technologically speaking, we focused on very specific areas. We worked very hard on high-level characters in a way never done before. We put all our energy into having the best character rendering and animation. For instance, we made very realistic effects for rain and tears on characters' faces. Our main aim was to set a new benchmark in terms of realism in character rendering, and I believe that this is one of the main differences between Heavy Rain and other games.
Weird thing we had before is just
lifting his head a bit down on the end of the animation. So this is something we change to make the loop even more discrete so we don't see the repetition. The player is able to move its character. So this is a way to give the control of the character to the player, and this is also a way to introduce some behavior really that are not mechanical, that are not loops. We break the cycle with putting something that moves completely outside of any loop. It's random, it's dynamic, it's real. If the player leaves the character alone for 3 seconds, a really short mob, the character is gonna take a new pose. It won't stand in its basic regular stand pose as anyone do. Each actor is gonna choose some of the some attitude, some behavior that he usually have, and this is some details that really brings a lot of detail on who is the character, what is he thinking about.
Another aspect of our job is to create facial animation, and thus to really give life to the character. It's a moment when we truly work with the actors, shooting facial mock-up with them in order to give life to the character's face, to make it talk and act in accordance with the situations.
Dad! Hey, take it easy, you're gonna knock me over. So this is your big day, huh?
Am I grown up now?
10 years old, that's not exactly grown up, but you're getting there.
It wasn't bravery. It was love.
Telling stories, this is probably one of the oldest human activities since language exists and writing exists. I mean, people tell stories and people like stories to be told.
Hi, my name is David Cage. I'm the writer and director of Heavy Rain. Welcome to the launch event of Heavy Rain in Paris.
Very happy to be here in Paris. This sort of new generation of games warrants a big splash. It needs to be its story, it needs to be told.
That's really it, stepping in, because I'm not someone who was a gamer beforehand. The thing that really attracted me to this was the idea that they're selling it on how far will you go for someone you love.
What I love about it is there are choices all the way down, and you don't know what the consequence of those choices are going to be. And unfortunately, as the FBI guy, I killed a religious nut by mistake, and I'm still worrying about what that's going to do to me later in my life. I think I was reassured that because I had to do other things. I saved a woman who had slashed her wrist and was drowning or dying in the bathtub, and it took me ages to work out how you manipulate it, because the movements of the control thing aren't the normal violent ones. You have to develop a rhythm, and you bring her back to life.
It's not a game, it's not a video game per se, it's not a movie, it's something different. When I saw the actors here with the same expressions, they're the same thing, you're like, okay, they're not coming out of nowhere. They're actually people. You can feel the flesh, you can feel that there are emotions behind, there is blood pumping, and it's not just all digital. There is something, there is a soul behind.
A game usually asks you to do over and over without thinking, to learn a certain series of repetitive movement. Here, you're constantly forced to think about your choices.
It's great to share the pleasure of releasing this game with all the people who participated to the development, but also to journalists and to press and to gamers. So it's just about sharing tonight, really.
All the 4 main characters will be confronted in a way or another with this investigation, but also with this question: how far are you prepared to go to save someone you love? And each character will have to answer this in different ways, and all these different interlaced stories tell a bigger story.
The emotional journey is a series of
intense challenges that make you question your moral position, your physical ability, but I think most of all it puts you in situations where there are exceptional circumstances and you don't know whether you're going to step up to be emotionally capable of following through.
For me, playing Madison was like playing any other role really, whether it was for TV, film or whatever. You kind of bring, you connect to the character and you are acting in that moment. So whether you're on stage or on a set or in a sports hall or wherever you may be, you're still bringing the same energy and the same inspiration to that.
Working in a game is kind of like really liberating. The motion capture technology is really fun to work with because it enables you, you're not waiting to do close-ups and different shots and stuff. You can do it all in one, so in many ways it kind of gives you that kind of theatrical flow, and then they can do whatever they want.
There's been an awful lot of people working on the project. We have our own studio with approximately 100 people, full-time employees, but we work with 90 actors. We had approximately 60 people overseas working with us. We outsourced in a very interesting fashion some of the graphics in the game, and we had also artists that came to the project, for a certain time to bring their expertise in certain fields, for the character creation, for the set creation. So all in all, we had approximately 220 people working on the game. So it's quite a massive production.
Where Heavy Rain tries to evoke empathy or sadness or joy and really try to become an emotional roller coaster, make you go through very different types of emotions, and pleasure of playing comes also from what you feel.
A story, by essence, is linear. And interactivity means giving you the possibility to go wherever you want and basically not follow the linearity of a story. What David and his team have invented is called bending stories.
We started to consider our story like a rubber band that the player could stretch or deform based on his actions. So the backbone of the story is always there. Whatever you do, it's your rubber band. But depending on what you do, you can stretch it or deform it. And so you create different stories, but keeping the backbone of the main stories.
And again, you have the choice. And that's the interesting thing, is that you get to play both options. That's definitely different, and that's quite unique.
The first example of non-linearity is in the Happy Birthday scene. It's based on the fact that the player's time is subject to a predefined timer. He can perform a large number of actions, but he does not have time to do them all. In this first scene, he has to make choices. Does he want to go to work, go outside, have fun? None of these choices have any consequences, but they familiarize the players with the basic principle of Heavy Rain. Nothing is really story-driven. Once he has integrated this logic, the player will encounter several scenes with increasingly important choices to be made. In the father and son scene, he can look after his son, or he can neglect him. Of course, these early choices will have consequences. This second example of non-linearity in the story is based on the role play. The player's behavior thus has consequences for the rest of the game.
How did things go at school today?
I was punished because I didn't do my homework.
I'm sorry about that, Sean. Next time, we'll really pull it together, okay?
And this is the third type of non-linearity. scenes where the consequences are really important for what comes later. Thus, when Shelby encounters Lauren for the first time in Sleazy Place, he can succeed in getting very important information for the rest of the investigation.
What do you want to know?
Just as he can succeed in getting himself thrown out of the room without any information because of his rude behavior.
I bought 10 minutes of your time, didn't I?
Get the fuck out!
In the same way, when Lauren is attacked by Troy, does Shelby intervene or does he leave them to it? These choices will naturally have consequences for Lauren. Later, in the supermarket, Shelby can prevent, by word or deed, the hold-up man from attacking Hassan, just as he can let poor Hassan get shot. This choice is of capital importance for what follows. If Hassan dies, Shelby will never get the box with the origami figures. As this never happens, there will be no reference to it in what follows. In the same way, Mad Jack can be arrested right away, rather than having a fight with him. Ethan can also decide to kill the dealer or to spare him. If the player decides to spare the dealer, he will not have the hangman letters corresponding to this trial. This will hamper his progress in his search for Sean.
Well, when you have an experience like Heavy Rain really based on story, the game over status doesn't really mean anything in matter of storytelling. It doesn't really exist. So we try to find new ways of treating failures from the player. So, okay, you missed, your character failed or died, but the story goes on. It continues, it's just an information that the script takes on board.
There are many scenes where the heroes can die, which will influence the course of the game. If Madison is killed by the doc, she will never get to Shelby's apartment. Similarly, if Ethan is arrested by the police in the On the Loose scene, he will not be able to get to the origami rat trial. Moreover, the final scene, the warehouse, can be played out in several different ways. Ethan can be alone, or be accompanied by Madison, or Jaden, or both. In the same way, Madison can be alone, or with Jaden, and vice versa. Finally, none of the heroes may manage to save Sean. All of this will have an effect on the epilogues. Heavy Rain is not a game in which, although there are several different possible routes and actions, there is only one ending. There are many endings that necessarily vary with the player's choices in the course of the adventure. These endings are a little like a window that gives us a glimpse of each character's future after the game. We can see them draw closer to each other or further apart. Some of them can become completely depressed, while others may recover a love of life. The endings are in the form of many little epilogue groups. This is why we can't speak of a determined number of endings. In reality, each character can end up in different ways. Each player will therefore see a unique combination of these multiple epilogues, depending on the choices he made with his characters, thus rendering his experience and the denouement of his story unique. From the very beginning with Heavy Rain, we were looking for the kind of atmosphere you find in detective movies. Dark, cold, and disturbing, but also mysterious and fascinating. The artistic direction grew out of the Origami Killer's modus operandi, drowning in rainwater. Right from the start, rain appeared as the key to the story. It lends fatality to our tale, but also the feeling of an insurmountable force, the impression that we're fighting against elements that will continue on course whatever we do. Whatever happens, the rain will fill the tank, drowning the Origami Killer's victims little by little. Ethan will fight relentlessly against this fatality. Human misery and sadness are added to this irresistible and increasingly murderous power. The captured children all come from underprivileged backgrounds with nothing to fall back on. It was only logical to conjure up the great cities of the East Coast, The game is close to 7, and like it, it also needed a strongly typed urban environment. We retained Philadelphia. In the preparatory stages of Heavy Rain, some of the team went to spend a few weeks in Philadelphia with cameras and movie cameras, soaking up the strange atmosphere, particularly in the more run-down districts where the story would unfold.
Several elements impressed us. The kindness of the people, the violence of the city, the poverty, the barbed wire and the oil factories in the heart of the neighborhood. Without meaning to convey a message, the subtext of Heavy Rain also has something to say about this social aspect of America. The images we brought back from Philadelphia were very useful in rendering the background of Heavy Rain credible, but also in making its ambience more vivid and really giving it a meaning.
To translate these ideas, we decided to call in an artistic director from the movie world, Thierry Flamand. We were impressed by his work on the Crimson Rivers and gave him the difficult task of creating immense sets transformed by rain and misery. Most of all, we wanted to have a cinematographic point of view in our video game plot. The initial sketches resulted in more than 90 sets, almost all of which were retained in the course of the game. From the grim little motel room to the majestic highway in the rain and the run-down suburbs steeped in depression, the degree of perfection attained in these conveyed the background mood of Heavy Rain. The initial artistic concept resulted in a gigantic tableau in the form of the storyboard displayed in Quantic Dream's offices that drove the whole team and constantly confronted them with the main elements of Heavy Rain's plot. A disturbing story set against a background that is dank and squalid and majestic all at once. In fact, after the mall scene, we had to create a break by immediately introducing the real atmosphere of Heavy Rain. It was evoked in the opening credits, with everyday scenes, with characters in the foreground, and the omnipresent rain. This enabled us to highlight the city where the story unfolds as a powerful character. The idea of text placed in the set came from David Fincher's Panic Room. The credits scene is one of the most powerful scenes in the game, one that really lends it a unique color and ambiance. A rainy day, an element in itself, it becomes a player in the story in spite of itself, justifying the presence of the origami killer on the one hand, and the uneasy atmosphere that pervades the story on the other. It is a prime scenario element. It lends a dull color to this grim and sad story. Given that the story of Heavy Rain takes place in a very realistic universe, the action sequences had to be as realistic as possible. We did not want our characters to be supermen versed in the martial arts. Ethan is a family man and has no training in the martial arts. And although Madison is a sportswoman, she's no fighter. Jaden has received different types of training from the FBI, but he's really not an on-the-ground man. Shelby learned to fight in the street and proves to be a man of great brute force. When we had defined the profiles of the characters, we called in a stunt coordinator to work on the choreography. We called on Olivier Schneider, a stunt coordinator who is used to working for film and who already worked for us on our previous game. It all begins with a document describing the different action sequences in the game. Then we get together in the mocap studio in a rudimentary version of the set in order to elaborate the final choreography. It is a real joint effort, with Olivier contributing his knowledge of different combat techniques and situations, and us contributing the constraints that are specific to video games. The main difficulty in the exercise is that for each blow in Heavy Rain, we had to allow for the possibility that the blow is successful or that it fails, while making sure the different options are compatible. This is also where we work out safety problems, positioning mattresses, protection for stuntmen, etc. When it comes to shooting the choreography, everything has been worked out. All the stuntmen have to do is give it all they can.
The action sequences in Heavy Rain were a great pleasure for the camera team to direct. The variety of situations, from car chases to close combat and gunfights, make it a pure pleasure for us movie lovers. These are very interesting sequences to film, and a game like Heavy Rain allows us to explore a whole range of situations, all of which are very different. In film, the sheer scope of things involved, from restricted budgets, prevention of accidents, and damage to sets, can place severe restrictions on actions. Once a scene has been filmed, it is rare to be able to reshoot it. Curiously enough, the advantage of video games lies in the non-spontaneity of the filming. The freedom offered by the real-time camera animation tool, which was specifically developed for this game, enables us to completely review the direction of a scene several months after it is shot. Nothing is fixed. We can explore new ideas and improve direction right up to the last minute. However, the constraints lie elsewhere. We must never lose sight of the fact that the player must not be a mere spectator during action sequences. Having spectacular action is not enough. The player must feel completely immersed in the experience. That means that we are often forced to make compromises in terms of framing and editing to ensure that the player always has the information needed to understand the action required. A real joint effort between the camera and the gameplay teams enables us to find the right balance between spectacular direction and the playability of the scene.
We chose, at the beginning of Heavy Rain, to introduce the interface in a scene that all players are familiar with, waking up in the morning. The player comes to grips with the interface while performing everyday actions. As he discovers the controls, he interacts with his environment in the simplest way possible. Progressively, and without realizing it, he takes on the role of Ethan Mars in his everyday life. This scene, which seems to be extremely simple, took a very long time to put together. In the very first version, the house had only one floor, and the scene began directly at Ethan's drawing board, where the player learned the game controls. Then it developed with the addition of an extra floor in order to introduce Ethan more progressively with the wake-up scene. The scene became a little sandpit where the player is free to choose what Ethan does. For example, whether he works at the drawing board or wanders into the garden while waiting for the family to come home. The scenes with the kids were obviously absolutely essential to the story.
That's it, I'm free as a bird.
We had to build up the relationship with the kids at all costs, establish this well-balanced and loving father in order to have the player really implicated in his father role later on. Playing with the kids, making them laugh, engaging in a sword fight with his son, all of these are taken from the life of all fathers and really get the player into his role as a father. All the motion capture animations of the kids were recorded with real 8 and 10-year-old kids, Taylor Gassman for Jason and Quentin Cage for Sean. The dead bird sequence closes the scene, like a sort of omen.
What's up?
It's Merlin dead and it's all my fault.
No, it's not, Sean. Of course it's not your fault.
Sean is confronted with death for the first time. Ethan has to respond to his son's sadness.
There are some things which just have to happen, even if you don't want them to.
His response, which is one of resignation, is an admission of his own powerlessness when faced with death. It is a forerunner of what is to come. The mall scene is the central scene in Heavy Rain, the one where everything changes in a matter of seconds.
It was extremely important for me to have the player playing the scene and the first scene in Ethan's home. We could simply have shown the scenes in a cutscene, but the player would have not felt implicated in the same way. Playing a scene or merely watching it completely changes the player's relationship with the story and his identification with the character. So it was imperative for the player to experience these scenes with Ethan rather than just showing them. The player doesn't just know Ethan's history. He has lived it with him, he knows what he lost, and he feels the guilt.
The scene is really quite simple. The player loses his son the first time, but quickly finds him again near the clown. When Jason disappears a second time, we change the animations for Ethan's movements to make him look more panicky. The calm camera at the beginning of the scene becomes a handheld camera. The music increases the pressure on the player. We used the same mechanisms as film to create the dramatic tension in a classic manner.
This sequence is the perfect example of what every sane video game developer avoids like the plague. It lasts about 5 minutes in all, but it took us almost 2 years to develop. Managing a crowd in which the player can move freely means managing around 1,000 passers-by at the same time. We had to use a lot of tricks to get around the technical constraints. To optimize the calculations, the game program masks all the passers-by that are not in sight, while continuing to simulate their movements and their animations. If the player turns his head very quickly, the paths of the crowd members remain consistent, even if they have not been displayed for a time.
Then, all that remains is to bring the camera closer in order to increase the agonizing impression of being with Ethan. Here again, classic movie directing.
The accident scene is one of the rare sequences that I storyboarded before filming it. It is quite a complex sequence with a lot of things happening at the same time. There is Ethan coming out of the mall, Jason who is lost, the car coming. By using 3 windows, we could tell these 3 stories at the same time and lend a particular style to this scene.
The player loses his son in this scene. Everything that happens is his fault. The aim of this scene was really to create a very powerful feeling of sadness, almost depression, a feeling that is rarely presented in such a tangible manner in interactive experiences.
This scene is one of my favorites in Heavy Rain. Everything depends on the relationship the player decides to have with his son. He can decide to play the responsible father who looks after his son and tries to reestablish bonds, or he can be the father who is crushed by sadness and guilt and who prefers to turn in on himself. Both attitudes are consistent with the character, and it is the player's actions that dictate Ethan's attitude after the accident.
The depressing atmosphere in the house is based to a large degree on dynamic management of light and shadows in order to imitate fading light at the end of a fall afternoon. The sun goes down, the shadows lengthen, and the light begins to fade until it plunges the house in darkness. The scene requires management of the boy's behavior. Goes to the bathroom, gets himself something to eat, and falls asleep on the sofa. Whether he was a good father or a negligent father, the player is now bonded to his son because they have shared something together. This bond will build up the player's motivation to recover his son after he disappears. Through his choice of actions, the player contributes to building up the character and his motivation. In the original version of the game, Shelby entered Anne Shepard's hospital room just after Madison. He hugged her in his arms and then smothered her with a pillow. We decided to exclude this very violent scene. A man who venerates the concept of the father to such a degree, and by extension the concept of the family, cannot kill his mother like that. And although we learn that Anne's son never visits her, it may have been too radical to envisage Shelby getting rid of his own mother, who is senile to boot, therefore incapable of remembering that he is there. By merely looking at his mother without talking to her, he again becomes the little boy who is desperately seeking a father worthy of the name in a world that has disappointed him. Initially, the idea was that when Ethan had his blackouts, he would find himself in a sort of nightmare, lost in the ruins of a house underwater. Ethan would swim without really knowing where to go, just following the corridors until he came upon the body of the child, the victim of the origami killer. He would then wake up, as in the final version, in Carnaby Square, with an origami figure in his hand. The first blackout takes place after Ethan puts his son Sean to bed. Once Sean is asleep, Ethan goes back downstairs, but when he reaches the bottom of the stairs, he sees water on the floor at the front door. He turns around and sees water coming down the stairs behind him. The water continues to rise. Looking out the windows, we realize that the water outside is already higher than the house. Ethan runs toward the front door of the house. When he gets there, the door literally explodes and an enormous quantity of water submerges Ethan. The second blackout, which is much more spectacular, happens when Ethan loses Sean in the park. The camera started to tremble more and more, and a tsunami suddenly submerged that whole part of the city. Then we found Ethan underwater, as in the previous blackout. Two similar elements for a paranormal explanation. Shelby was present at the time of Ethan's accident, and a special bond was forged between them. From then on, Ethan accessed Shelby's mind whenever he killed children, corresponding to the times when Ethan found himself in the house underwater, filled with Shelby's memories. The water is the metaphorical representation of the killer's mind. During his blackouts, Ethan goes to Carnaby Square, the place where Shelby's brother died, and he makes an origami figure at the same time as the killer makes one to leave in the hands of the victim. These scenes were not retained in the end because they made the story too complex and introduced a paranormal element that added nothing to the story. We decided to remove them a few months before the end of development, particularly in order to speed up the start of the game, recenter the narration, and anchor the story in reality. This scene shows us Ethan getting out of bed in the morning. He goes to wake up Sean to take him to school. The scene is redundant because of the father and son scene. However, this part of the game was not without interest. It placed the player in the role of a responsible father, looking after his son and himself. As he passes near the letterbox, Ethan notices the origami killer's letter that informs him that his son will soon disappear. Of course, it is a touching scene, but too close to the father and son and the birthday scene for it to have any real existence of its own. We therefore decided to include the letter in the father and son scene and to get rid of this scene. Madison is the most enigmatic character in the game. We know very little about her, an insomniac journalist investigating the origami killer. In one of the first versions of the game design, Madison went to her newspaper office several times. At the American Tribune, she could conduct research to find possible suspects, speak with her boss, and write articles after her missions. In the same way, Madison's apartment was different in the beginning. It was in the process of being redecorated. One of the player's first tasks was to repaint and change the layout of the apartment in order to personalize it. This was an interesting characterization process for a character who still remains quite mysterious. We never learn in the game why Madison suffers from insomnia. In reality, it stems from her past. As a journalist, she was a war correspondent during the armed conflict in Iraq.
1 second, the blinking of an eye, a breath, enough to change the course of a life. We only know how much we love someone when we know what we're willing to sacrifice. I never asked myself that kind of question. Without knowing why, without asking myself how far I would be prepared to go for love. Sometimes it's better not to know. Everything I did for love.